Hello, everyone. Thanks for checking out this special episode of Really Dicey. This is Manny. I'm here with Dave Allen, producer and writer for Warhammer Fantasy Role-Playing 4th edition, a book called Deft Steps, Light Fingers. I love the title. I have to say it captures your attention. If you would have called this a Rogues and Ranger handbook, I think it would have not have. I think anyone would just kind of go, just pass it by.
Yeah, we'd had a book that was dedicated to ideas for playing warrior characters called Up in Arms, which sort of did what it said on the tin, and then Winds of Magic for the wizards. So we couldn't think of a similar pithy title for both rogues and rangers. But Deft Steps, Light Fingers, that made it sound like, obviously rangers picking their way through the wilds of the world deftly, and rogues with their light fingers depriving people of their money.
So before we talk about this book, Dave, so just so I understand a bit of your background, you've been writing tons of Warhammer books for a while now. What was your earliest works?
Been into Warhammer Fantasy Role-Play since very close to the start, as a sort of fan. And then I joined Games Workshop in 2003 when they were just preparing to release second edition Warhammer Fantasy Role-Play, which they were doing together with Green Ronin. Games Workshop were kind of looking after some of the production aspects of it, and Green Ronin were looking after the RPG-specific aspects of it, I suppose. That went on until about 2008, and then around that time, not only did I leave Games Workshop, but Fantasy Flight Games acquired the license. They were the first ones to ask me to write for it, because I'd previously been the web developer. But I put some stuff online that they'd been quite impressed with, so they asked me to write for it as well. I did write for that and a number of other Green Ronin Fantasy Flight Games products. And then around 2018, Cubicle 7 got the rights to produce the game, because Fantasy Flight and Games Workshop had ended their license agreement with one another. So Cubicle 7 have been developing 4th edition Warhammer Fantasy Role-Play ever since, and I think I've been involved in... there's a few products here and there that I haven't been involved in, but generally speaking, I've been involved in pretty much everything. And I did join Cubicle 7 full-time in 2020, and I've been working as sort of like either the assistant producer or producer of Warhammer Fantasy Role-Play ever since then.
Wow. If I may ask, hopefully I'm not deviating too much from our discussion about the book, but what is it like being that you've written for Warhammer for almost 20 years, and to help develop the lore of Warhammer for like three editions?
Yeah, I think it's quite strange, because obviously the lore these days is such a matter of discussion on channels such as yours. So it does seem to be getting the respect it deserves a lot more these days than it did 20 years ago, I think, when it was more about sort of forums and wikis and so on. So I think the... obviously, role players have always been interested in the details and the consistency of the background material, but now there seems to be a sort of wider fan base for that sort of thing as well. So it is interesting to see how much more interest it garners. In a way, I think it's a lot easier now, because it's much easier to get all the resources you need online to find, if you're doing research into a particular subject and you don't possess your own library, like I do tend to get all the books I can get my hands on. But even so, if you're looking through, say, doing some research, and you find out that something got mentioned in a novel or an old gaming book that you don't have access to, being able to find either Games Workshop providing it for us if we ask for them to look through their archive, or finding it somewhere online is a lot easier. Putting together writers' teams and getting them all the research material they need as well tends to be a lot easier than it used to be as well.
Deft Steps and Light Fingers. I'm really enjoying that Warhammer is now in a stage where they're producing these wonderful source books. You mentioned the Warriors one and the ones for Magic, and then there's also the 2 books that just came out recently about dwarves and elves. So this book, was it? What would you say the origins of it exactly? Was it just a natural progression of what Warhammer's been working on, Cubicle 7's been working on. Did you feel like there was a need for expansion?
Yeah, we're sort of spot for choice with sourcebook ideas because there's so many and there's never enough time to do them all. So as well as you were saying, the dwarf and elf books would be like major player species that people could never get enough information about of, and we've sort of done for the dwarfs, the Dwarf Player's Guide, which give players everything they need to start playing a dwarf, and then Lords of Stone and Steel, which is a bit more GM focused, or a bit more in-depth knowledge about the lore in the world. And we've done the High Elf Player's Guide, and soon to release Sea Wardens of Cathik, which will do the same for the city of Tor Koru Ali in the north of Ulthuan. But obviously, Deft Steps Like Fingers falls into that sort of like a book inspired by character classes, because there's 8 character classes in the main rule book, and then an additional one in Sea of Claws, even iterations on certain classes and careers throughout the other books. We'd really still only getting into the subject with the 3 books we've put out. So Deft Steps Like Fingers, it is based on ideas to support playing primarily a rogue. I think there's a bit more information about playing a rogue or a roguish character, or even one of the one of the rangers is the outlaw, which obviously ties in well with rogue, because if you're trying to escape justice, that's really the only way you can reliably do it. It's just going through and, you know, coming up with the ideas for what are people looking for if they're playing characters from those classes that we haven't really provided a great deal of support for in books so far, and how we could add to that in Deft Steps Like Fingers.
So before we talk about the book and talk about the chapters and what contains in each section, I have a copy, and thank you, Cubicle 7, for supplying me with a copy. This book begins not with like, hey, here's some stats, some new information of what you can be now, or some sort of options for your character. It starts off with religion. It starts talking about the cult of Ronald, and if I'm saying that right, hopefully
That's right, yeah.
And so I was really happy to be introduced to this like that, because it doesn't just like give you stats and I'm trying to figure out like the rules and so forth. It gives me a story. It gives me a couple stories, and it just expands on that into some of the new options you can be. I love that. If I ask, what was the creative process behind that?
I think the main decision behind it was that before it had been brought on as producer, the decision had been made to cover the cult of Ulrich in a source book, rather than wait until doing a big priest book with all the different religious faiths in one single priest book, the way that had been done for second edition. And third, I think, as well. By the time that I was in the position to start putting together ideas for supplements, we already set a precedent for covering certain gods and their followers in a book that was on related subject matter. So I think it's the one of the companions for the enemy within, I think it's the power behind the throne companion, had the cult of Ulrich in, for example. And that's makes sense for it to be there, because the cult of Ulrich are important for that part of the adventure. So when we came to do Up in Arms, as I've mentioned, we had the cult of Myrmidia covered in that book. And when we came to Deft Steps Like Fingers, we sort of thought rogues and rangers. We got the god of rogues, which is Ranald, and the god of the wild, which is Tal. So it seemed to just make sense to cover those subjects alongside everything else we're going to cover in the book.
And I like that because it gives me a sense of like, where do these new options belong? Why do they exist? And how does it affect the environment around them?
Yeah, and I
And I
think it helps remind us as well, because there's a sort of the cultural aspect of the religions, and that will affect, especially with the rogues, if you've got a god who doesn't like violence being carried out in the commission of a crime, for example, that means that organized criminals aren't going to like that god. And those criminals who do want to benefit from him are going to have to tread quite a sort of tightrope in between being sort of dashing gentleman criminals who sort of not about the sword fighting swashbuckling, but definitely about the sort of rooftop escapes and cunning tricks to hide from the law or hide from the master of the house or whatever.
Mm.
So I think it does. It is good to remind us when we're approaching a subject to go, what are the cultural aspects of the Warhammer world that are going to impact on this subject and make it different to the real world? And definitely Ranald was a big consideration along those lines.
And I love that you're given different perspectives about the gods. Like for me, Tal seems for a nature deity extremely dangerous.
Yeah,
Like I would be afraid if I was in that world of that deity. But I love the different perspectives of depending who you are and how you may relate.
well, we do always promise a grim and perilous world, and even though I've said, Ranald is actually, as a god of crime, relatively chilled out with his advice not to be violent, Tal is a god of the wild, and the wild does have both its nurturing and destructive aspects, and he has to embody both of those. So,
Well, I'm sure our viewers want to know, like, okay, what's in the book exactly? So let's
uh,
go ahead and talk a little bit about the chapters in
sure.
each. Oh, which I have to say, I love that the beginning, ending, end of the book. There's these gorgeous maps.
Yes.
Uh,
So that's Morno's Rap of the Reichland that we've commissioned recently, and we're really pleased with that.
if I may ask, what was the art direction like for this book? Was there any certain ideas you were trying to convey?
Yes. For example, I think the first picture you'll see when you come into the book is a picture of a picture. And
Mm.
this is something that we were sort of thinking about in terms of if you've got already a fantasy world that has within it its own myths and legends, how do you show those myths and legends? Because they didn't really happen. Like they weren't events from the recorded history of the Warhammer world, but people living there believe that they happened and want to venerate them and remember them. So we thought that a good thing to do when showing a possible reason for why Ranal became a deity is to depict a picture of him being granted mercy by Shalia, with the accompanying story that one of the most famous, several reasons for why people think Ranal became a god, but the most famous is that he gulled Shalia into saving him from a disease that would have killed him otherwise. So that's an example of the sort of art direction of the. And then the other thing is just trying to play to the strengths of individual artists that we returned to recently. So, for example, Benoit, who's in there a bit, he's very good at sort of things that look like in-universe artifacts, cartoons, and so on. So he did the diagram that shows the relationship of all the different gods to one another that we're trying to present as an in-world artifact, if you like. And then Moreno, the other cartographer, whose name I can't pronounce, his work in the book is also presented as stuff that's been produced by cartographers in the world. So they're not modern scientific maps, if you like, but one of them is that one that's shown on the end papers. It's nice and full color and illustrated, and then the other one sort of to try and help show the same region, but more like the different terrain types that you come across in that region, because as we'll come to later, I'm sure there's a chapter about navigating through different types of terrain. Whereas Alessandro Boa, he's really great at doing detailed figures, so he's really good to ask for career art and so on. And Sam Manley, our in-house artist, is really great at the same sort of thing. So really wanted to get them on the career art because they always really knock that stuff out of the park.
Yeah, there's an image which I'll and when I edit this, I'll add it and show it to our viewers better. But
Mm-hmm.
this is my favorite, one of my favorite. I don't know if you can see it.
Yeah,
This.
so that's one of Alessandro's pieces, which is we sort of had this idea for a fence who would be good for tying in various other adventures as a contact, because obviously throughout the various adventures that you play in and around the enemy within campaign and some of the scenarios that we've produced, you do bump into criminal organizations at various times, and we thought it'd be nice to have a character who had opinions and contacts on a wide array of them, and who would be grateful to you for putting him in touch with those he doesn't know. So that was part of the reason for how that character ended up.
Yeah, just to let you know, besides like, I know when we think of source books like these, we think about like, character options, but there's some incredible amount of good NPCs in this
Mm-hmm.
book as well. Lots of like the organized crime section.
Uh-huh.
I love that section. The characters are very fleshed out. They have stats and there's the history and motivations. I think that was a lot of fun to read.
Yeah.
Um, but I don't want to jump too far ahead. So
No.
let's start the first chapter, Cult of Ronald.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, that we sort of discussed already. That deals with not just about the deity of Ronald, but their followers. And there's so it looks like there's three character options.
There's 4 character options for the 4 major aspects of Ranald. Now, there's a couple of other little aspects that are mentioned sort of in passing, but since he first appeared in Warhammer First Edition Core Rulebook, he's said to have had these 4 main aspects, and we sort of thought it'd be fun to try and go, well, then let's not just have 1 or 2 priest types that are associated with him, but one for each of these major aspects. So that's where
Yeah,
that came from.
yeah, and it's very interesting. They're all thieves of some sort, but they're clergy, and it's just their roles are very different from one another. You
Uh-huh.
got the thief priest.
Yeah, so
Um,
that's the sort of Ranald in his aspect of the Night Prowler is sort of your standard thief deity. So he's the one that if you are trying to break into a house or make off with someone's purse, he's the one that you cross your fingers to and utter a quick prayer to, and his miracles will help facilitate that sort of horrible activity that we don't condone at all, obviously.
but yeah, you have the gambler priest, which that's a fantastic.
Yeah, so that's the second aspect of Ranald is him as the gamester, so that he's then the patron of people who are pushing their luck, and obviously the gambler is the most obvious archetype associated with that.
Yeah, again, this is just great world building. Of course, liberator priest and the I missed one.
The Deceiver Priest. Yeah, so the last 2 major aspects are he's sort of a people's champion, so um, there are priests of Ranald who are less interested in thievery and trickery and more interested in, say, running a soup kitchen or helping to undermine the cruel local tyrant or something like that. So that's embodied in the Liberator Priest and their followers of Ranald in the guise of Ranald the Protector. And then the last one is Ranald the Deceiver, who's more about sort of con artistry, trickery, things not being as they seem, and so on. And these long confidence tricks games. And again, that's the last of the 4 major facets that's covered there.
I don't think I've ever read anything like this where you have a church of run by thieves, but run effectively. Like this
Uh-huh.
works, in my opinion, in Warhammer. This is it's very functional, which is crazy thinking that.
Yeah, it
Um,
is functional, but it's also very anti-authority and anti-establishment. So it's kind of like in most places in the old world, if you try and openly worship Ranald, you will quickly run into trouble. But he's not quite as despised as the gods of chaos or openly evil gods. So it's a nice sort of middle ground between the respectable establishment religions and things that are totally despised and will get you executed if you mention them too much. But Ranald's in that sort of like middle. There's a nice middle ground grey area there, which we hope to explore in that.
the next section, burglary. I don't know if I'm saying this right. Chicanery. I
Chicanery.
always read that chicanery. I always
Uh-huh.
read that word, but I never read out loud before. And
Right.
fraud. So this was like the section where if you want to be straight rogues, this is kind of where you could start with. What
Yeah.
can you tell us about this section?
Well, we'd sort of noticed that a lot of times in thieves' books, it just tends to be like, how do you get better at moving around your opponents and stabbing them with daggers and stuff like that? And we wanted to look at sort of like, yes, that is an important part of being a thief, but it's more about how available are people for your pickpocketing, and how are they going to react if they notice you trying to pick their pocket? And if you do try robbing graves in a society that is worried about, missing corpses turning into undead monsters, how hard are the authorities going to come down on you, and all this sort of thing. So again, it's sort of that both the practical and cultural consequences of being a thief in this setting. Is it really a good way to make money? If you look at the stuff that you can get from a purse, a lot of it is quite humble stuff that you're going to be lifting off the average, person who isn't paying attention in a pub, for example. They're not going to be carrying around their whole wealth with them, and you're more likely to get a dirty handkerchief than 12 gold crowns, that sort of thing. So it's sort of exploring that practical aspect, and then because we have a downtime system in which you can abstract your professional life into just getting a bit of extra money whilst you're in between adventures, but we come up with a consequences table for each sort of rogue character to represent that they are living a bit more of a chaotic life than your average stevedore or town guard. So money is going to be a bit more irregular. It might result in a bit more than another character would be expecting, if you've been lucky enough to meet some people who are willing to buy into your con artistry during downtime periods. But it might also mean that you attract the notice of the local crime lord who wants you to give him a cut of everything you earn and all this sort of thing. So it's not necessarily harder, but it is more complicated.
But one of my favorite sections about this chapter is the pickpocket chart, where that it's possible that you may take something that might lead into more chaos for your character.
Yeah.
Some sort of new adventure in a way.
Yeah, well, it was that sort of consequences thing of like, fair enough, that person at the bar, they might look like the perfect sort of, dare I say, vulnerable idiot who isn't looking out for their purse, but you don't know that they're actually suffering from Black Plague or itching pox or secretly a mutant or something like that. So it's all that kind of like the decision to rob someone is a big decision for a number of factors that you haven't necessarily thought about.
The next section, which we sort of talked about a little bit, criminal contacts. I know we talked a little bit about some of the NPCs already that are in here, but what can you tell us about the creation process behind this chapter?
Yeah, so this is the idea that knowing other characters who are also criminals is something that most criminals are going to benefit from if they can form a bond of loyalty with them. So this is sort of getting us towards the organized criminals chapter, but not quite there. It's just a little network of, well, you're a burglar, so it'd be good to know a fence who you can give your burgled items to, and they can get rid of them in the next city down the river or whatever. So there's a small array of characters. I think we chose sort of like the fence, as I said, a sort of charlatan type who can help you with alternate identity, maybe townsman who owns a house that they're willing to let you lie low in the attic for a couple of days until the watch go looking for someone else, and so on and so on. So it's just those other criminals who would be useful for any criminal to get to know and get to build a relationship with if the party itself isn't fulfilling all those roles. Everyone wants to play a different sort of rogue within a party, then you can have your little gang being the party itself. But if you are the thief who's adventuring alongside the noble, the troll slayer, and the wizard, for example, and they're not really interested in helping you out with your pickpocketing, then you can at least build a relationship with an NPC who's like, oh, I understand. And if you are friendly to them and do them the odd favor and give them the odd bit of extra cash when you're flush, then hopefully they'll continue to help you out. But as with all manners of criminal activity in the real world, it can go very wrong. And we've got the tables of what happens if you don't keep up regular contact with your contact. They might get compromised in various ways, or simply decide that they don't want to have anything to do with you anymore.
And the chapter after that, which is, I guess you could say they're sort of siblings, organized
Uh-huh.
crime.
Yeah, so that's
Um,
the next level of organization is like, well, shall we actually put together a criminal gang and try and keep it a going concern, despite the fact that you want to go adventuring every few months? Which obviously not an easy thing to do. I wouldn't really recommend it, but it is possible to get together a band of thieves and other ne'er-do-wells and try and run it as a business. But you do have to expend quite a lot of your downtime efforts into maintaining this group. Otherwise, it'll all break apart, and there's even more nasty things that can happen, like watch crackdowns and gang wars and so on. So it could be a great source of adventure as well if someone really wanted to. The way it's presented in the book is of something to look out for when you're not adventuring, but as with all the other events and endeavors and downtime activity, if they do inspire adventures of their own, then that's really great. And we hope GMs are able to get adventure ideas from it. And I think definitely trying to run your own criminal gang in Null or Marienburg should generate plenty of ideas for adventure.
so the next chapter, the Cult of Tau,
Uh-huh.
um, something for scouts and ranger types and so forth. Yeah, so it what can you tell us about it? What inspired you to start this section?
Well, again, it's just sort of the having started the rogue section with the Cult of Ranald, it just made sense to start the ranger section with the Cult of Tal, and we had already looked at his wife or divine counterpart Raya, who's the sort of the goddess of domesticity and farming and the fertility that can be derived from the natural world. She was covered in one of the archives books. Tal is her slightly sort of, as I say, wilder and more dangerous, husband counterpart who's more representative of untouched nature and wild beasts and so on.
Yeah,
So,
I have to admit, it caught me by surprise because I don't think I've read Tal thoroughly until I looked at this book, and
mhm.
then I'm reading. It's like, oh, a nature god. I'm thinking much more happier things.
Right.
And I'm reading. I was like, oh my gosh, this god is brutal.
Uh-huh. No, I think he should be. I think he should be at least half brutal.
Mm.
And it's the same with his relative Manan and his son Ulrich. No, brother, brother. So yes, that family of the old gods is. I don't think any of them should be particularly nice. And even Raya, who's the sort of the farming goddess, she still wants sort of a degree of sacrifice and work put into seeking her favor and so on.
And just like the cult of Ronald, so there's also new careers
Mhm.
available this chapter as well. I see there's a ranger priest variant.
Yeah, so the Ranger Priest is specifically for Tal, but having spoilt everyone with 4 different types of priests for Ranald, we did just think of the one for Tal.
And I love there's a section about laws, outlaws, and bounty hunters. I think that's a really great so if this book is about ranger types and rogue types, I can't
Mhm.
imagine like bounty hunters and those variants are a great in between of the two.
Yeah, so I think that the bounty hunter and the outlaw, those are like two sides of the same coin. But obviously, the outlaw is the consequence of having been a criminal, and then the bounty hunter is the one who goes and benefits from tracking the outlaws down when they become notorious enough to earn a bounty. And then I think is it the chapter on justice and enforcing the law that's part of that as well.
So the last two sections, pathfinding and hunter and hunted, I sort of in my mind put them together because they seem like just like organized crime and criminal contests, kind of like siblings, where it's like rules building, options.
Yeah, we had some journey rules in early Warhammer Fantasy Role-Play supplements, but I think the issue with them is that they didn't. They described what a sort of stage of travel was, but they made it very ambiguous and just sort of like, oh, that's as long as your GM wants it to be. And I think we should break it down a bit more into like, oh no, this is a certain distance that you can get to, depending on your base movement rate. So we've done that now for Sea of Claws, which has travel at sea, and the Lords of Stone and Steel, which has travel underground, and Deft Steps Lightfingers, which has travel through various types of wilderness. And hopefully they're all quite consistent with one another, and you can go between them all, and the same sort of time that you devote to travel will cover the same sort of distance you're able to cover in that amount of time, and so on. So I think that was very important to try and get right. With Deft Steps Light Fingers, because you're going through either swamps or temperate grassland or mountain terrain and so on, there's a different set of consequences through trying to get through that terrain, especially if the weather's bad and things like that.
If I may ask, Cubicle 7 has come out with a few books like these already. Is there any more plans for other additional source books like these?
Well, I can really only say about future releases that people have to keep an eye on our social media channels and our website. We have spitballed like various ideas, and we would like to do something that's a sort of denizens of inner cities or rural types. That'd be a nice contrast, or courtiers versus academics, things like that. And certainly we've sort of talked about, as I say, we've done most of the cults of the major gods at the moment, but there are still some that are yet to be addressed, including Sigmar. Yeah, there's plenty of room for more of these books, but we're not announcing any news of any just yet. No.
Mm. And again, I love the lore. This is something I can, if I'm playing, let's say I've been asked to do like say a Dungeons and Dragons campaign. There's a lot of great stuff in here that, the organized crime section and criminal contact is so good, that I can't wait to. I think it's already in my mind. Like if I have to do something like that in any other system, I have this as a backup to
Yeah.
think about and read about to get the right tone of it.
Oh yeah, and something else now that you mention it, something else we did think about quite a lot was sort of like how do you levy the consequences of crime, as in if the watch are not just going to ignore you while you're picking pockets and so on, you will get arrested eventually. And then we've did put an awful lot of thought into, well, how do we make sure that a trial isn't just a boring, straightforward process of skill rolls and mechanics that half the party aren't going to be involved in. And if someone does get arrested, what can everyone else do in order to keep play interesting for them, or work out some way of springing them without hopefully compromising the background? And it's still like, it really shouldn't feel like the Warhammer world is forgiving about this sort of activity. But at the same time, we do want people to have fun with their games. So there's various ideas for how to try and marry those that paradox.
So let's say someone picks up the core rulebook for 4th edition Warhammer Fantasy Role-Play, and they also picked up the Deft Steps, Lightfingers Sourcebook. Where if they wanted to make a story, a campaign of sorts with their friends, do you recommend other books in the Warhammer line that might be helpful for a rogue?
Yeah, definitely. So I guess it sort of depends. Whenever I'm at conventions and so on, one of the questions I do ask, if in return, if I get asked that question, is do people want to do a very lengthy campaign, or would they prefer to do an array of shorter adventures? We've published a great deal of short adventures, either singly as PDFs that people can get from DriveThruRPG or our website. But we also do collected adventures in the form of Ubersreich 1, 2, and 3, which are short adventures that you can probably do in a session or two, but there's half a dozen of them in each book, and you can tie them together using ideas that are given in the book. And then on the other end of the scale, the Enemy Within campaign, which people are always very highly regarded campaign. That's always sort of like one of the ones that if you are into role-playing, you really ought to try at some point in your role-playing hobby career. That's 6 large books, each with its own companion volume, which is full of supporting ideas for the main book. And even a role-playing group that were going at it at a very sort of brisk pace would still find themselves playing for a year or 2 or 3 or 4 before they got to the end of it, you know. And it's sort of like one of the things that people really like about it is that there's several sections in it that are quite open-ended and not time-dependent. That 4 years could turn into 8 or 12. I don't know. As long as people want to keep playing it, they can play it, basically. And some groups are quite famous for playing it perpetually. So, yeah, that's the experience that obviously everyone involved in Warhammer Fantasy Role-Play is going to recommend sooner or later to anyone who's really interested in it. Is don't miss out on having a go at the Enemy Within campaign.
All right, excellent. Well, Dave, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us about this amazing book. Don't be surprised if I invite you for your other books as well.
Oh, no, that'd be great, yeah.
Yeah, I'm really enjoying the lore of Warhammer. It's a great series. And I'm hoping to get to play more as the year progresses. And to our viewers and listeners, thank you for watching. Stay safe out there. We'll see you next time.
Cheerio.